G'day groovers, rockers, and in between. This is Vinyl Vibes. I'm your host, Jack Hodgins. Today we're talking with legendary bass player Steve Bingham. Steve got into bass at a very young age and got his first big break when he joined the Foundations in 1969. He would tour and record with the band till they broke up in 1970. Throughout the 1970s, Steve did a lot of session work for the likes of artists like Colin Blunstone of the Zombies. In 1974, Steve was a part of the recording process of Ronnie Lane's album Any More for Any More and played live dates with him on his tour, The Ronnie Lane Passing Show. Today, Steve is still playing with his band Slim Chance and in Gino Washington's The Ram Jam Band. G'day Steve and welcome to Vinyl Vibes.
Hello Jack, and it's a good day to you and nice talking to you.
No, absolutely, Steve. And look, I just want to start at the beginning. You know, you were born in 1949 in Warwickshire, England. Do you remember much about your childhood?
Yeah. Well, that's Warwickshire. I was born in a place called Solihull, which is Warwickshire is now officially called the West Midlands, and it's basically I was born about 6 miles from the centre of Birmingham.
Yeah, and I mean, was there much music going on like while you were a kid?
Not really. I mean, growing up as a kid, my mum and dad, they had the radio on all the time. Sort of as I was growing up, it was the early 50s and stuff like that. And my sort of childhood memories of music really are sort of really sort of very old songs that my mum and dad used to sing to, you know. But there was neither my mother or my father were musical. Just coming into teenage years, because I've got a sister who's 6 years older than me. So she discovered rock and roll, and all of a sudden we had an very old radiogram in the front room. And all of a sudden, these rock and roll records started to come into the house, you know, Elvis, Buddy Holly, Little Richard, all that kind of thing. And that really, you know, sort of lit my fire, if you like, because after hearing all this old-fashioned stuff that Mum and Dad used to like, it was a revelation, you know. When Bill Haley came out with Rock Around the Clock, I mean, it sounds such a long time ago now, but mind you, I've still never met anybody who can play that guitar solo in Rock Around the Clock. They were my first, you know, musical kind of influences, and then my sister dragged me along to a local youth club when I was probably about 12 or something like that, and they had a live band there, and it was a Birmingham band called the Strollers, and I was absolutely transfixed by the bass player. I wasn't really watching the drummer or the guitar player, but just the sound of the bass, and I just fell in love with bass playing at that moment, I think, and I'm still playing. So it must have had a big effect on me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. What was it about seeing the bass being played like by the Strollers, as you said, that really like resonated with you so much? Like the sound of the bass, like what resonated with you so much about that sound?
I don't know. You know, I just heard the sort of depth of the bass, and it seemed to anchor the music, if you like. I hadn't really, you know, the only basses I'd seen on television were double upright basses, you know, double basses. And all of a sudden, this guy's got, you know, Fender basses started to come into the country in the late 50s. The Fender bass was a revelation. The biggest thing that really got me going was that, and it was again my sister, it took me along to Birmingham Town Hall, and it was a bill with it had all Birmingham bands on. Some very interesting people like Denny Lane, who went on to you know, partner Paul McCartney and Wings, and he had his own band called Denny Lane and the Diplomats. But the star of the show that they'd flown over from America was Little Richard, and Little Richard came over with all his own band. Was an absolute sensation. When I saw that, I was just totally. I was just totally blown away, and I just felt, you know, that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I've done throughout my life. But I would say seeing Little Richard was probably the most exciting live performer I've ever seen.
Before you joined the Foundations, you were in a group. You formed a group called Misty. Am I right on that?
Yeah, that's right. What happened was I played with a few local bands around Birmingham, and I really wanted to move to London because London, was where it was all happening, and all the recording studios, the big recording studios in London. So actually, when I was 18 years old in 1967, I moved to London, and it was a massive leap of faith, really, for me, because I didn't know anybody in London. I mean, it's the sort of thing. If you did it now, you'd be in a helpless position because property is so expensive and rent is so expensive. But what happened to me was I left for London, and as luck would have it, I got a local paper in London. I ended up there was somebody said to me, look, your best bet is to try and get a flat share, and there was an advertisement for somebody to share a flat, and it was quite weird, really. I went along for it, and I was thinking, well, okay, if I can't find somewhere to live, I'm going to have to go back to Birmingham. But this guy was sort of really a real sort of enthusiast about music, and he'd had a few people come to see the flat, and he said they were a bit boring, and he sort of thought I was a bit lively coming down from Birmingham, trying to make a career in music. And I actually the next he said, well, look, you can stay, and if you can go to the Social Security tomorrow and get some money, you can have a room in this house, and that's how it all started out for me in London. And then I answered a few adverts, and I actually I was 18 at the time. I joined a guy, a Jamaican sax player called Sonny Burke. And cut a long story short, that was a great experience for me because he introduced me to ska and reggae, which I loved, and lots more soul music. It was a very soul-y type of little band. And whilst I was in that band, we advertised for a keyboard player, and I met a guy called Michael Gilardi. Michael and I, he was a classically trained pianist, so he came from a classical background, but he loved the background that I came from, and we became great friends, and we started mixing up classical music with rock music, basically, and we actually formed the band Misty. Michael his father was very well connected, and we actually, first of all, we put out a single, it was called Hot Cinnamon, and that came out on the Parlophone label, the Beatles label, actually. And we had a manager, a guy called Michael Grade. They paid for us to make an album. The single didn't do, it was played a lot, but it didn't chart. But we made an album, and myself and Michael Gilardi wrote, 11 of the 13 tracks. We had a singer that wrote a couple. And so we had this album. We couldn't get a deal. We just could not get it signed to anybody. And at that time, I suddenly got a call from the Foundation's manager that they'd parted company with their original bass player, a guy called Peter Macbeth, who didn't play on any of the Foundation's records. It was all done by session bass players, and they were looking for another bass player. And I got offered the job because at the time the Foundation was a world famous band. They'd had Build Me Up Buttercup had gone to number one in America, number one in Australia as well, and it basically went it sold millions of records. And they were an extremely well known band, and they were offering me money that I'd never dreamed of. And I took that job, and the album that we made just got shelved until during lockdown, when the COVID epidemic, sort of shut down the whole of the flipping world, I got a call from Michael Gilardi, and I hadn't seen him for about 40 years. It's an incredible story, and he said, "Steve, you're not going to believe this. I found the acetate of the album that we made, and it was played to a record company, and they went crazy over it. And they actually, that was another company to to where it ended up, because it actually ended up with a great company, actually, Cherry Red Records, and one of their sort of imprint labels was Grapefruit Records, that actually deals with like 60s, early 70s sort of stuff that nobody's really heard too much of. And the amazing thing about that album was that, and still is, because it's going to be coming out on vinyl later in the year, but it's come out on CD. It's Lord Grade he's over the moon that something that he financed, all those years ago, has suddenly, out of the blue has surfaced. So that's really the story of Misty. And sadly, the drummer that played on it, he passed away, and the singer, he's not in the music business anymore. And Michael Gilardi, my partner in crime with the songwriting, and he went into the music business. So I was the only member of Misty that actually carried on playing, and made a career out of playing. It's a success, but a success over 50 years later, which is really, really weird.
When you did join the Foundations, I think there was some things going on with their manager Barry Class. I think they departed, and I think there was. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to ask is how were the band feeling at that time when you kind of joined the Foundations?
Well, I was very excited about joining them, but you're absolutely right, Jack. There was I soon learned that there was friction, if you like, between the manager Barry Class. Barry was he was a very shrewd businessman. That's all I can say. And he was actually, when I met him, he was a very charming guy. And there was nothing. I didn't think there was anything weird about him. But the big problem that I soon found out, after being in the band for sort of 2 or 3 months, was that they'd had all this success, this worldwide success, but none of them had any money. That was a major cause for concern. And it caused sort of also their original singer Clem Curtis, who sang one of their first big hit was "Baby Now That I Found You," which is a fabulous record. And but Clem Curtis had left the band to go solo, but they got in my opinion, a much better singer actually. They got Colin Young in, and Colin Young is the guy who sang "Build Me Up Buttercup" and another great record, "In the Bad Bad Old Days." It wasn't, sadly, it wasn't sort of all flowing along nicely. It was, there were people arguing amongst themselves and stuff like that, and I realised very quickly that it wasn't what I thought it would be. And eventually, Colin Young left. I sort of joined up with him, and the really, really weird thing is that Colin, I can't remember who put the money up. Colin made a really superb solo album, which I played on every track. I was under the impression that album had never seen the light of day until, and this is an extraordinary story. Just very briefly going back to Misty, Michael Gilardi, who formed it with me, came along to see me at a gig playing bass with Gino Washington, and he had a Misty T-shirt. He had some T-shirts made, and a guy approached him and he said, I know that band. And he said, well, you can't, mate. It's 50 years ago. And he said, I know that band. He said, you had a single out called Hot Cinnamon. But anyway, it turns out that this guy was a policeman, or he just retired, but he was head of the cyber fraud squad at Scotland Yard. You couldn't make this story up. You really couldn't. But he's also an absolute authority on vinyl. They call him the record detective, and he's got just thousands and thousands of vinyl albums and stuff, and an absolute sort of walking authority on that kind of era and everything that was done. And I was introduced to him, and I told him the same story I'm telling you about Colin Young. I got a call from him, and this was only last year, and he said, Steve, you know that album you told me about, that when you left the Foundations and you went with Colin Young, and you told me about an album? And I said, yeah, it never saw the light of day. And he said, well, I've got news for you, son. He said that album came out big time and did really well in Italy. And he said, not only that, he said, I can get you a copy of it. It cost me about 70 quid, £70.
Yeah.
But that's why they call him the record detective. He found somebody in Italy that got it, that was prepared to actually sell it, and I got my hands on just such a precious piece of work, because it really is a great album. I don't think that Colin Young himself, I'm not in touch with him, but I don't think that Colin Young has got any idea that it was released either. But that's just an incredible story, isn't it?
No, it absolutely is, Steve. And just on the Foundations, before we move on from the Foundations to your later work, I was doing some reading, and you played bass on one of their singles, I think. I'm Going to Be a Rich Man. Am I correct on that?
I did play on that, and I'm very proud of that, actually, because that was in a sort of session whereby we did that one, and they were another thing that the Foundations were doing, which I applaud them for, actually. When I joined them, they were moving away from the pop stuff. It turned out to not be a great career move, in all honesty, but they were trying to sort of expand their musical horizons, if you like, and I was all for that, because I'd just done it with Misty, and I just so the whole Misty thing was totally and utterly original, and so I was all for doing original stuff. They went into Pi recording studios in central London, and we recorded these are the only recordings that I actually played on with the Foundations, and we recorded about 5 or 6 tracks, which again subsequently came out on a double album that I was amazed, because I thought that had been lost forever. But no, a few years ago, all those tracks were released on a double album. But the best one of the bunch was I'm gonna be a rich man, which was actually written by Colin Young, who I've just been speaking about, because Colin was a very, very good singer and a very, very good songwriter. And that came out, and it had a sort of more American-like canned heat type of feel, type of groove to it. And it's up on YouTube, and I think I'm very proud to have played the bass on that, because I think it's a really great track, and we were all very excited when it came out, but the sort of radio stations were so used to the Foundations doing stuff like Baby Now That I Found You and Build Me Up Buttercup, which were sort of ultra commercial records with brilliant hook lines. You can't take that away from them. They were amazing records, and they still get played today, so they've stood the test of time. Whereas I'm Going to Be a Rich Man was a much more sort of earthy American R&B influence type of record. But yeah, that one is probably the standout track. That I played a lot of live dates with them, as you can imagine, but recording-wise, there were those those 5 tracks that I played on. But I'm really glad that I've got them on a CD. So I've actually, just in the last few years, I've been sort of going back in time and trying to find albums that I knew I played on, but I never had a copy of them. So I've got quite a few albums now that I played on, and it's a great collection. I'm very, very proud of them.
Yeah, and you mentioned there that you did quite a lot of live dates with the group. And we kind of touched on before how maybe the energy wasn't there, like within the group. It wasn't maybe the greatest energy of that it could be. What was it like playing live with them? Was it a good energy on stage?
It was. They did what they did very, very well. It was, but really, also what happened was about the time that I was working with the Foundations. That kind of music was beginning to be, not in vogue anymore. You got the big heavy rock bands were coming along, like Free and Deep Purple, people like that. They were the ones that were really sort of. The ridiculous thing was, one of the, and this is a great story about talking about playing live with the Foundations. We were sort of top of the bill over Free. And Free had got that All Right Now out, which is a fabulous single. But the Foundations was nevertheless a much more famous band because they had already had multi-million selling records. So we played at a university, and naturally I wanted to watch Free, and I did. And they were absolutely sensational. They were just brilliant, and it was an absolutely packed university campus. There were thousands of people there, and it was an amazing performance. I've got to hand it to them. They were brilliant, and we went on afterwards. And it sounded very, very lightweight after Free had been on, and it was a bit embarrassing really because we didn't go down half as well as they did. But I always remember their drummer. I think it was Simon Kirk. He came up to me and the drummer of the Foundations, a great friend of mine, Tim Harris, who's sadly no longer with us. But the Free's drummer came up to us. He said, "I love your drum and bass in the Foundations. It was amazing." So that made me feel a bit better that somebody out of Free had been watching us when we played and thought it was good, because I must admit, personally, I felt we'd been blown apart by them. But the Foundations did what they did very, very well.
No, absolutely. And I mean, when the group did eventually break up, I think it was around 1970, maybe 71. How was that for you?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
How was that for you? Like going through that?
Well, it was sad, really. Really sad because I felt that there could have been a lot more mileage in it, looking back on it, I think it was inexperience, that kind of led to the breakup. You could always look at things in hindsight, but I think if it's like the old, like the Ronnie Lane and Ooh La La song. I wish that I knew then what I know now, because I'd never have. I'd have done everything to stop them breaking up if I'd have known what I know now, because there was a lot more mileage in it. We should have simply gone to another record label and found another manager. Barry Klass was, I think in a way, people were sort of slightly afraid of him because he was a Svengali type music business characters in those days were people you didn't mess with, and it felt a bit like that. But as I say, it transitioned into something, because I joined Colin Young, but we didn't. I was the only member of the Foundations that basically he wanted in his new lineup, and we had an amazing experience actually, because we were one of the first British bands to tour South America. That was in 1971. So the Foundations had sort of split up, but I found myself on stage in Buenos Aires, and we played in Montevideo in Uruguay. Then we went to Brazil. We played in Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and it was the experience of a lifetime. It was absolutely incredible. However, the tour was put together by the aforementioned Barry Klass. He had a couple of representatives over there. Although it was the most, incredible time in my life, and I met some amazing people, and it was just fabulous. But the representatives, Barry's representatives in South America, when it came to payday, they disappeared. They took a plane into the Amazon jungle and were never seen again.
Yeah, right.
And that's a true story. We were waiting, and they said, "But okay, we'll bring the money tomorrow, boys," because we'd done a load of television and all that, and you know, we thought we were all going to, you know, make a few thousand each out of it. And we were sitting in a hotel room in Sao Paulo, and these guys were supposed to, you know, arrive with the money at about sort of 2:00 in the afternoon, and by 4:00 in the afternoon, alarm bells started ringing, and I think by about 6:00 in the evening, we were all sitting there and realised that, you know, there were no sort of, nobody had sort of said that some sort of disasters occurred somewhere or anything like that, and we later found out that, you know, I wasn't joking when I said they'd gone. Apparently they'd taken a flight from Sao Paulo into the depths of some remote airstrip in the Amazon, and they were gone. You know, they were gone with the money. So that's it's a typical music business story, really. I mean, I don't think it happens so much nowadays because people are more savvy. But yeah. So the breakup of the foundation was sad, and it could have been avoided, I believe. You know, had we all known, you know, then what we know now. But the foundation is still going, and with the only original guy in it is Alan Warner, who's the original guitar player, and he played on all those records.
Moving on from the foundations now, you mentioned a little bit before the album you did with Colin Blunstone of the Zombies, Ennismore, and there's a great song that you do on that you play bass on that, Sign From Me to You, and I mean that's a very important bass line to the song. I think they took the track and doubled it up with some orchestra, like strings and all that. I mean, yeah, take me through the recording of that album.
Well, you know, that was a marvellous experience, actually, playing with Colin Blunstone. He's a unique, you know, there aren't many singers in the world that you can sort of recognise instantly, but he's one of them, and he's an amazing singer. His tuning, his timing, and he's also a very, very nice guy. He's you know, a very unassuming guy, and he's just so talented. And it was very, very amazing working with him, and also to be recording at Abbey Road, where the Beatles made all their albums, it was just marvellous. You know, it's an incredible studio complex, you know. But it was just great working there. We did an amazing, actually. The album was really, really great, and that song, you're absolutely right. And it made me laugh when you know, because my name's not down as well, I only sort of arranged. It was my bass line, you know, and there was a load of cellos and strings all over it, doubling up the bass line. And I was very proud when I heard it, but it's only in later life I thought, what a cheek, you know. I might have should have got a bit more credit for that. but I'm really, really, I love Ennismore. It's a lovely album, and one of the real funny story, actually, because I only did one tour with Colin. We were supporting the very first tour of the ELO, Electric Light Orchestra. But the leader of the band then wasn't Jeff Lynne, but Roy Wood. And Roy was decided to play cello in the Electric Light Orchestra. It was quite funny because we went on tour with Colin, and it was an experience never to be forgotten because we had 12 members of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra in the band. We had 4 violins, 2 violas, a double bass, cellos. You know, there were 12 of them in all, and they were absolutely, you know, they're just a world-class string section, if you like. And we went on first. I'd say it myself, they were just fantastic gigs. They were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But then the Electric Light Orchestra hadn't really got their thing organised like it later became. And with the best will in the world, Roy wasn't classically trained cello player. So he was getting cheesed off, really annoyed every night because he'd already been upstaged by, the Royal Philharmonic guys, and there were a couple of ladies in it too. And they were just fantastic. They were world-class orchestra, and having them, playing alongside us in the band, it was just wonderful.
Of course, after you did your work with Colin, you got onto working with Ronnie Lane a bit, and I'm just thinking, how did you come to meet Ronnie Lane?
I think I mentioned I was doing some sessions with Bruce Rowland, with Joe Cocker and the Grease Band and all kinds of other people. And he called me up one day and he said, "Steve, I'm doing this thing with Ronnie Lane." Ronnie was obviously a bass player himself. He was the bass player, as I'm sure you know, in the Small Faces, and he was a bass player in the Faces. But what he didn't, he'd written all these songs, marvelous songs, but he felt more comfortable singing those songs just playing rhythm guitar, which I fully understand because it's incredibly difficult to play bass and sing at the same time. Bruce said to me, well, at that time, Ronnie, He'd shunned all the London nightlife and all the rest of it and the pop star stuff. He'd left the Faces and he got himself a farm down in. It was in the middle of nowhere, Jack. It was right out in a place called. Well, it was called Fishpool Farm. Bruce took me down there to meet Ronnie, and he had this little cottage and about 100 acres of land. And he had an old barn, a rickety old barn, But outside the barn, Ronnie had got one of only 2 mobile recording studios in the UK at the time. I think it's called an Airstream. There's like a silver bullet shape. The Rolling Stones, I think, had got the other one, and Ronnie owned, this one. His first album, Anymore for Anymore, which includes one of his most sort of revered tracks, really, The Poacher, which I played bass on, is on that album. And but it was an amazing experience because, all the other recording I'd done was sort of in multi-million pound, EMI, Abbey Road, and places that were really, really sort of incredible. So there we were, standing in this old barn with all these wires going out to the Airstream recording studio, which was parked outside the barn. Ronnie didn't care. There were chickens running about, there were kids running about playing, and it was just it was just the strangest thing. And we were playing music, standing around more or less in a circle or semicircle. And it was a really great band. It was fantastic. And just playing music, and I'd never seen a mobile recording studio before, let alone seen how it all works, An incredible experience, and a lot of people, they do think that album, I'm sort of, not it's not because I played on it, but a lot of people, regard it as Ronnie's most crucial and incredible sort of work when he left the Faces. And then, of course, we embarked on the legendary Ronnie Lane's passing show, which that's a story on its own because he decided to take a circus tent on the road with him, dancing girls, clowns, fire eaters, and a whole crew, going along the British motorways at a very slow pace. And I played we only did, we played in 7 locations, but three gigs in each location. Like the tent would be set up. It would take 2 days to set it all up and get all the seating in there and everything like that. It was just an amazing thing. And then we would actually play live sort of Thursday, Friday and Saturday. And then the tent can't come down. It used to come down quicker than you put it up. But it would still take a couple of days to get the tent down and all the stuff packed away. Then we'd go on the road. We all travelled together, and we all stayed together. Ronnie had got a bunch of caravans. They weren't caravans as we know caravans today. They were rickety old things, They were basically they were falling apart. And but we all stayed in in those, and everybody sort of took their wives and girlfriends with them. It was a very family type of thing.
In terms of the audiences that were going to these shows, I mean, how did they react to something so new and exciting? Like, because I mean, there'd been nothing really like this before in music. Like, this tour by Ronnie Lane was pretty innovative at the time.
It was, and Jack, it's never been done since. You know, and I think probably the reason it's never been done. I mean, there are so many health and safety laws nowadays. I'm sure it's the same in Australia, but you know, you can't do anything without this law, that law, and it was an incredible undertaking. And you know, this will make you laugh. Sometimes we turn up at a place, and the local council, the way it was organised was very shoddy. It wasn't good, but we turn up in the middle of a town, pitch the tent in the local sort of park or wherever, you know, and all of a sudden you get these people from the council coming down and say, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing? You know, a couple of times we all thought, blimey, we're not going to be able to play here. But Ronnie was a very, very charming man. He had this sort of cheeky, chappy attitude. What he would do, he had the best caravan. He had a really, really nice caravan. He would invite the local council officials into his caravan. He'd proceed to open a bottle of brandy, and then he thought nothing of opening another bottle of brandy. For several hours of negotiations, you know, these people had come staggering out of Ronnie's caravan, all shaking hands with him and all that, and saying, "Yeah, well, go ahead, Ron. Everything's okay. We'll be there on Saturday." And it was astonishing the way he could sweet talk these. You know, I'm not sure you'd be able to do it now. You know, you'd be sort of hung, drawn, and quartered. But we got away with murder. But the reaction, getting back to your question about how people reacted, unfortunately the gigs weren't that well attended. Some were. You know, sometimes when the tent was packed out, the atmosphere was it was incredible. But it was actually an incredible atmosphere inside the tent when there was nobody there. You know, even when we were just running through in the afternoon, the atmosphere just inside this massive sort of circus tent and all these caravans parked. It was like a travelling circus. And but the organisation, we actually got to some places. We travelled the length and breadth of the UK. We went down the south as far as Bath in Somerset, and we went up as far as Falkirk in Scotland. So it was just an amazing undertaking. But in some places, people had sort of come while the tent was being set up, people had come along and say, well, what's this all about then? And so, it's Ronnie Lane's passing show. And they would say, well, we don't know anything about this. There's been no publicity. And actually, what happened was that the management, who were really to blame for all this, they'd get some last-minute leaflets printed, and they'd send them up, you know, like about 500 leaflets printed up, and we'd actually be walking, the band, we'd be walking around the local restaurants and pubs and stuff like that, asking people to put them up in the window for the up-and-coming weekend's gigs, you know. Vehicles were breaking down, and it was quite clear it just couldn't carry on anymore. It was amazing, actually. It really was.
Of course, not only do you have Slim Chance, but you mentioned Gino Washington and the Ram Jam band there. And are there any upcoming gigs coming up with them soon? Or what's going on with there?
A film came out called There's Something About Mary, starring Cameron Diaz. It's a great film. And the song that everybody remembers from that film is Build Me Up Buttercup. The film was going, you know, it was a major, probably one of the most famous films in the world at the time. And everybody said, well, what happened to the foundations? And so we quickly reformed and we did a tour. On that tour, the same bill was Gino Washington. We did the tour, and I got to know Gino a little bit. I really got to know his bass player, a guy called Silas Maitland, is still a great friend of mine. After that tour, I got a call from Silas because he was doing other things as well as Gino, and he said, could you stand in for me for a couple of nights, you know, with Gino? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. So I did that, and then, you know, a few weeks later, I got another call from him saying, Steve, you know, could you do 2 or 3 dates for me? I've got something else, and with Gino, you know. And I said, yeah, I'll do that. So for a couple of years, I was actually sort of deputising for Silas, and then I loved it. I absolutely loved it. All of a sudden, Silas was doing more and more things outside of Gino. He'd formed his own band. He was sort of asking me to do a lot more gigs. Gino phoned me up one day. He said, look, Steve, I really want like a permanent bass player. I really want somebody to be in the band. I don't want deputies coming all the time. And he said, we're really happy, you know, when you come along and deputise with us. He said, we love your playing and we're really happy. And he said, would you like to join the band? I had no hesitation in saying yes, I'd love to. And I've been doing it ever since. We don't do quite so much now, especially since lockdown, but we've got some great gigs coming up. And we're recently, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we played the Glasgow Jazz Festival, and they flew us all up to Scotland, and we went down an absolute storm because Gino, health-wise, he's not as good as he used to be, because Gino himself is going to be 80 years old in December. But his voice is and his ability to entertain people. I mean, he's just wonderful. He's an incredible guy, really incredible. Funnily enough, well, on Thursday night we're playing the sort of legendary Eel Pie Club, which is where the Rolling Stones and those kind of bands all started out. So it's been a marvellous experience. I do manage the band, and I'm very heavily involved in the organisation of all the Gino Washington and the Ram Jam Band gigs and stuff. So I'm quite involved with that, and I'm also involved to a certain extent with the running of Slim Chance. I also run the record label that we release our albums under. So I'm very, very. I think it's what keeps me going.
The future sounds very exciting for you, Steve. And look, I just want to, thank you so much for making the time out of what seems like a very busy schedule from all you've got going there. Just thanks for taking the time.
Well, Jack, it's been really, really nice speaking to you. And, you've asked me some amazing questions about my career. I've been absolutely delighted to talk to you, and thank you very much for asking me.
That was former bass player of the Foundation, Steve Bingham. To keep up with Steve's work, you can head to his website at stevebingham.blogspot.com. Remember to share this episode with other music fans, and if you really enjoyed this edition, we'd love it if you let us know. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Vinyl Vibes, and to all you music lovers out there, stay groovy.